After years of failures, one perfect weapon changed everything. The Mark13 torpedo dropped from my TBF Avenger sliced through the Pacific waters like a blade through silk, its wake arrow straight toward the massive Japanese cargo vessel. No premature explosion, no erratic course, no sinking to the ocean floor like a dead fish. For the first time in 3 years of war, I watched a torpedo do exactly what it was designed to do, and the enemy ship erupted in a tower of flame that painted the dawn sky orange. My name is Lieutenant Commander James Razor McKenna, and I flew torpedo bombers in the Pacific from 1942 to 1945. I witnessed the transformation of American naval aviation from desperate improvisation to overwhelming superiority. But no single moment defined that transformation more than the day we finally got torpedoes that worked and used them to tear apart Japanese convoys like wolves among sheep. The Mark13 torpedo should have been our secret weapon from the beginning. When I first climbed into the cockpit of a Douglas TBD Devastator at Pearl Harbor in early 1942, our briefing officer spoke of the Mark13 with reverence. 22 inches in diameter, 13 feet long, carrying a 600-pound warhead of pure destruction. On paper, it was the perfect ship killer. In reality, it was a death sentence for American aircrews. The first time I dropped a Mark13 in combat was during the Battle of Midway. Flying low and slow in formation with 11 other Devastators from Torpedo Squadron 8, we approached the Japanese carrier force through a hurricane of anti-aircraft fire. The Zeros came at us like angry hornets, their machine guns chattering death. One by one, my squadron mates fell from the sky in balls of flame. I released my torpedo at the perfect range, 2,000 yards from the carrier Kaga. The Mark13 hit the water, porpoised once, twice, then dove straight down into the depths like a rock. No explosion. No damage. Just another $10,000 torpedo feeding fish while Japanese sailors laughed at our incompetence. Of the 15 torpedo bombers that attacked at Midway, only one returned. I was that one, flying home alone with a sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the 0 bullets that had punctured my fuel tank. We'd been betrayed by our own weapons. The problems with the Mark13 were legion. Its magnetic exploder was hypersensitive, detonating prematurely or not at all. Its contact exploder was too weak to penetrate heavy armor. The torpedo ran too deep, passing harmlessly beneath enemy hulls. Its gyroscopic guidance system was so delicate that a hard landing in rough seas would send it spinning in circles. But worst of all was the requirement that we drop it at exactly the right speed, altitude, and angle. Too fast, and it would break apart on impact. Too high, and it would dive too deep. Too slow, and we'd become sitting ducks for enemy fighters. The torpedo demanded perfection in conditions where perfection meant death. After Midway, I was transferred to Torpedo Squadron 11 aboard the USS Hornet. We traded our obsolete Devastators for the new Grumman TBF Avengers, bigger, faster, better armed, but still carrying the same cursed torpedoes. Mission after mission, we dropped Mark13s that failed to explode, ran in circles, or missed their targets entirely. Japanese merchant ships sailed through our attacks unscathed, while we lost good men to fighter planes and flak. The frustration was eating us alive. In the ready room after another failed attack on a Japanese convoy near Rabaul, my wingman Lieutenant Bobby Torino threw his helmet against the bulkhead so hard it cracked. 3 years, he shouted. 3 years of this garbage. The Germans have torpedoes that work. The Japanese have torpedoes that work. Hell, even the Italians have torpedoes that work. What's wrong with us? Our squadron commander, Commander Bill Bull Morrison, was a veteran of the pre-war Navy who'd seen every disaster from Pearl Harbor to the Coral Sea. He'd watched too many good pilots die carrying weapons that wouldn't function, and it showed in every line of his weathered face. The Bureau of Ordnance knows about the problems, he said quietly. They're working on fixes. New contact exploder, better depth settings, improved reliability. It's coming, boys. It's coming. We'd heard that promise before, but throughout 1943 and early 1944, things slowly began to change. New versions of the Mark13 arrived with modifications to the exploder mechanism. The magnetic influence feature was deactivated entirely, too unreliable. The contact exploder was redesigned with a more sensitive firing pin. Most importantly, the Bureau of Ordnance finally admitted what every torpedo pilot had known since Pearl Harbor. The weapon's depth settings were completely wrong. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. Captain William D. Parsons, a brilliant ordnance officer who'd later armed the atomic bomb over Hiroshima, took personal charge of the torpedo program. He listened to pilots instead of dismissing their complaints. He conducted real-world tests instead of relying on theoretical calculations. And he demanded accountability from the engineers who'd been making excuses for 3 years. By the spring of 1944, we were getting Mark13s that actually worked. The new Mod 9A variant had a redesigned exploder, proper depth settings, and, most crucially, could be dropped from higher altitudes and at greater speeds. No more suicidal low-level approaches. No more watching helplessly as our weapons failed. The first successful Mark13 attack I witnessed came during a strike on Truk Lagoon in February 1944. Commander Morrison's torpedo ran straight and true, striking a Japanese destroyer amidships and breaking her back in a massive explosion. As the enemy ship rolled over and sank in less than 3 minutes, Morrison came on the radio with barely controlled emotion in his voice. "It worked, boys." The son of a finally worked. By October 1944, I was leading my own squadron, VT-11, aboard the USS Intrepid. We had the latest TBF-3 Avengers, experienced crews, and most importantly, reliable Mark13 torpedoes. The weapon that had once been our greatest liability was becoming our deadliest asset. The opportunity to prove it came during Operation King II, the massive carrier strike on Japanese shipping lanes in the South China Sea. Intelligence reports indicated a major enemy convoy moving toward the Philippines, 12 cargo ships, 4 destroyers, and 2 cruisers loaded with reinforcements and supplies for the Japanese garrison on Luzon. It was exactly the kind of target we'd been dreaming of: big, valuable, and vulnerable to torpedo attack. The strike was scheduled for dawn on October 15th. 4 carrier air groups would converge on the convoy from different directions, dive bombers and fighters to suppress the escorts, torpedo planes to deliver the killing blow. My squadron would lead the torpedo attack with 18 TBF Avengers, each carrying a single Mark13. That night in the ready room, I briefed my pilots on the attack plan. The faces around me were young, too young for the responsibilities they carried. Most had joined the squadron after the worst of the torpedo failures, but they'd all heard the stories. They knew what happened to torpedo pilots who trusted their weapons. "Gentlemen," I began, studying the reconnaissance photos spread across the briefing table. "Tomorrow we're going to do something no American torpedo squadron has done successfully since before Pearl Harbor. We're going to sink an entire enemy convoy with weapons that actually work." I pointed to the largest ship in the formation, a massive cargo vessel that intelligence estimated at 12,000 tons. That's the Hokkaido Maru. She's carrying 3,000 Japanese soldiers and enough supplies to keep them fighting for 6 months. Our job is to make sure they never reach the Philippines. The pilots leaned forward, studying the target photographs. Lieutenant Jimmy Walsh, a freckled kid from Iowa who'd joined us 3 months earlier, raised his hand. "Skipper, what if the torpedoes don't work? What if they're like the old ones?" It was a question everyone was thinking but afraid to ask. I'd asked the same question myself before every mission for 2 years. "They'll work," I said firmly. The new Mark13s have been tested and retested. The Bureau of Ordnance finally got it right. But more than that, I've seen them work. We all have. These aren't the same torpedoes that failed us at Midway. These are precision weapons, and tomorrow we're going to use them to show the Japanese what American naval aviation can really do. We launched at 0445 hours into a perfect Pacific dawn. The sky was clear, the sea calm, and my 18 Avengers formed up in perfect order behind me. Below us, the dark ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, hiding somewhere in its vastness the enemy convoy that would soon learn the true meaning of American air power. Flying beside me in the lead section were my 2 most experienced pilots, Lieutenant Commander Mike "Hammer" Davidson, who'd survived the Coral Sea in Midway, and Lieutenant Robert Ace Patterson, who'd scored the squadron's first confirmed torpedo hit with the new Mark-13s during the late strikes. Behind us, 3 more sections of torpedo bombers followed in combat formation, their deadly cargo gleaming in the morning sunlight. The radio crackled with the voice of Lieutenant Commander Jack Winters, leading the dive bomber squadrons. Razor lead. This is hammer lead. We have visual contact with the convoy. Bearing 270, range 30 miles. 12 merchants, 4 cans, 2 heavy cruisers. They're running southeast at about 15 knots. No air cover visible. My heart began to pound. This was it, the moment we'd been training for, waiting for, praying for. A major Japanese convoy with no air cover, perfect weather, and reliable torpedoes. It was almost too good to be true. Copy, hammer lead. We're 15 minutes out. Commence your attack on the escorts. We'll take the merchants. Roger, Razor. Give 'em hell. As we closed the distance to the convoy, I could see smoke trails on the horizon marking the positions of the enemy ships. The dive bombers were already beginning their attack, their hell divers screaming down through the anti-aircraft fire like blue angels of death. Explosions bloomed among the escort vessels as 1,000-pound bombs found their targets. Through my binoculars, I could see the convoy clearly now. The merchants were arranged in 3 columns with the escorts racing around the perimeter, their anti-aircraft guns firing frantically at the attacking dive bombers. It was chaos, exactly what we needed for a successful torpedo attack. All Razor flights, this is lead. Target assignment is briefed. First section takes the lead merchant column. Second section takes the middle column. Third and fourth sections take the rear column. Remember, drop at 500 feet, speed 250, angle of attack 30 degrees. These torpedoes will work, gentlemen. Make them count. We approached the convoy from the southwest, staying low to avoid the radar-directed anti-aircraft fire from the cruisers. The Japanese had learned painful lessons about American air attacks and were throwing everything they had into the sky: 5-inch shells, 40mm pom-poms, 25mm machine guns, even rifle fire from the merchant crews. The air around us filled with black puffs of exploding ordnance and glowing tracers. But we had something the Japanese didn't expect: confidence in our weapons. For 3 years, torpedo attacks had been suicide missions. We'd been forced to approach slowly, at low altitude, in perfect conditions, knowing that even if we survived to drop our torpedoes, they probably wouldn't work. The psychological effect was devastating. How do you press home an attack when you know your weapon will likely fail? But now, carrying Mark13 Mod 9A torpedoes with proven reliability, everything was different. We came in fast and aggressive, our formation tight and disciplined. When the Japanese fighters finally appeared, 6 Zeros diving out of the morning sun, we met them with concentrated fire from our dorsal turrets while maintaining our attack formation. Zeros. Zeros coming down, shouted Lieutenant Torres, flying wing position in the second section. Stay in formation, I ordered. Gunners, light them up. The air battle was brief but vicious. Our turret gunners poured 50 caliber fire into the attacking Zeros while the fighters tried to break up our formation. 2 Zeros fell in flames, their pilots probably too inexperienced to effectively attack a well-defended torpedo bomber formation. The remaining 4 broke off as we entered the convoy's defensive perimeter. Now we faced the real test: the anti-aircraft fire from 12 cargo ships and 6 warships, all concentrated in a relatively small area of ocean. The sky around us exploded in black smoke and flying steel. I felt my Avenger shudder as shrapnel tore through the wing fabric, but the engine kept running and the controls responded normally. First section, commence attack. Target the lead merchant. I pushed the nose down and lined up on the largest ship in the convoy, the Hokkaido Maru. She was a beautiful target, 600 feet long, broad beam, loaded with troops and supplies. At this range, I could see the Japanese soldiers on her deck firing rifles at our approaching aircraft, as if small arms could stop 14,000 pounds of angry American warplane. The torpedo sight in my cockpit showed the target centered perfectly. Range 2,000 yards in closing. Altitude 500 feet. Speed 250 knots. Everything exactly as briefed. Steady. Steady. I muttered to myself, ignoring the flak bursts that were getting closer and more accurate. Come on, you hold still. Range 1,500 yards. The Hokkaido Maru filled my windscreen, her anti-aircraft guns flashing like angry fireflies. I could see individual Japanese sailors running across her deck, some manning guns, others diving for cover. Range 1,000 yards. Now or never. Torpedo away. I pulled the release lever and felt the aircraft lurch upward as 2,000 pounds of Mark13 torpedo dropped away. Banking hard to the right to avoid the ship's fire, I looked back to see my torpedo hit the water cleanly, its wake arrow straight toward the target. No porpoising, no erratic course, no dive to the bottom. The Mark13 ran true. 23 seconds after release, the torpedo struck the Hokkaido Maru amidships with a flash that could be seen for miles. The 600-pound warhead detonated exactly as designed, blowing a massive hole in the ship's hull below the waterline. Water rushed into her engine room and cargo holds with the force of a tsunami. The explosion was so violent that it lifted the ship's stern clear out of the water. I could see Japanese soldiers and equipment flying through the air like toys thrown by an angry child. Secondary explosions followed as fuel and ammunition caught fire, turning the massive cargo vessel into a floating inferno. But I was just the first. Behind me, 17 more TBF Avengers were making their torpedo runs, and the new Mark13s were performing flawlessly. Lieutenant Commander Davidson's torpedo struck a 8,000-ton freighter loaded with aircraft parts, breaking her back so completely that she jackknifed and sank in under 2 minutes. Lieutenant Patterson put his Mark13 into the engine room of a troop transport, stopping her dead in the water as steam and smoke poured from her shattered hull. All along the convoy, American torpedoes were finding their targets. The second section attacked middle column of merchants and scored 4 direct hits out of 6 drops. The third section went after a pair of large tankers and sent both to the bottom in massive oil fires that painted the entire horizon black. The fourth section targeted the smaller cargo vessels and achieved an incredible 5 hits out of 6 attacks. In less than 10 minutes, we had destroyed or critically damaged 9 of the 12 merchant ships in the convoy. The 3 survivors were already turning away, abandoning their escorts and fleeing for the nearest port at maximum speed. The Japanese escorts tried to mount a counterattack, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The dive bombers and fighters from our carrier group swarmed over them like angry wasps. The destroyer Hayakes took 3 direct hits from 1,000-pound bombs and exploded with such violence that debris rained down for over a minute. Her sister ship Uyghur was crippled by near misses and left dead in the water, her crew abandoning ship as fires spread through her superstructure. Only the 2 cruisers managed to escape, racing northward at full speed while our fighters harassed them with strafing runs. But they left behind a graveyard of broken ships and burning oil that stretched for miles across the previously pristine Pacific. As we formed up for the flight back to the Intrepid, I looked down at the scene of destruction we'd created. 12 Japanese merchants had carried approximately 15,000 tons of military supplies and 8,000 troops toward the Philippines. Now 9 of those ships were sinking or sunk, their cargoes feeding the fish, their human cargo struggling for survival in oil-slicked waters. The statistics were staggering. In a single attack lasting less than 30 minutes, American naval aviation had destroyed more enemy shipping than we'd managed to sink with torpedo attacks in the entire first year of the war. The difference wasn't better pilots or improved tactics. It was reliable weapons. "Razor lead, Thesis Razor 7, came the voice of Lieutenant Walsh over the radio. "Skipper, did you see that? My torpedo worked. It actually worked." The excitement in the young pilot's voice was infectious. All around me, my squadron pilots were chattering excitedly about their successful attacks, their voices filled with amazement and pride. For 3 years, we'd been carrying weapons that betrayed us. Now, finally, we had tools worthy of American fighting men. "All Razor flights, this is lead," I transmitted. "Outstanding work, gentlemen." That's how torpedo attacks are supposed to look. But remember, this is just the beginning. The Japanese won't give us many more opportunities like this. They'll start using stronger escorts, better air cover, different routing. We have to make every shot count while we can. The flight back to the carrier gave me time to think about what we'd accomplished. The convoy we just destroyed had been carrying reinforcements for the Japanese defense of the Philippines. Those troops would never reach their destinations. Those supplies would never strengthen enemy fortifications. Those ships would never carry another cargo of war materials. But more than the immediate tactical victory, we'd proven something important about American industrial and military capability. We'd taken a weapon that had been an embarrassing failure and turned it into a devastating success through careful analysis, systematic improvement, and relentless testing. The Mark13 torpedo that had once been our greatest weakness was now our greatest strength. As 1944 turned into 1945, the improved Mark13 torpedo became the backbone of American anti-shipping operations throughout the Pacific. Squadron after squadron reported successful attacks on Japanese convoys, using the reliable torpedoes to choke off the flow of supplies to enemy garrisons scattered across thousands of islands. The psychological impact on Japanese merchant mariners was devastating. For the first few years of the war, they'd grown confident that American torpedo attacks were more noise than substance. Our torpedoes failed so consistently that Japanese cargo crews began to treat torpedo bomber attacks as minor nuisances rather than serious threats. That changed overnight once the Mark13 started working properly. Japanese merchant captains who had once maintained course and speed during torpedo attacks began making radical evasive maneuvers the moment American aircraft appeared on the horizon. Convoy schedules became erratic as ships scattered at the first sign of approaching torpedo bombers. The entire Japanese logistics network began to break down under the pressure of constant successful attacks. Our intelligence officers estimated that the improved Mark13 torpedo was responsible for sinking over 600,000 tons of Japanese shipping between October 1944 and the end of the war. But the indirect effects were even more significant. Japanese cargo ships that weren't sunk were forced to take longer, more circuitous routes to avoid areas of heavy American air activity. Loading and unloading operations were moved to night hours, reducing efficiency. Valuable escort vessels were diverted from combat operations to protect merchant convoys. The Japanese war economy, already strained by 3 years of global conflict, began to collapse under the pressure of interdicted supply lines. Raw materials couldn't reach factories. Finished products couldn't reach combat zones. Food couldn't reach civilian populations. The Mark13 torpedo, once a symbol of American industrial incompetence, became an instrument of strategic victory. I flew my last combat mission on August 10, 1945, 4 days after the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. It was a routine anti-shipping patrol over the East China Sea, but we found no targets. The Japanese merchant marine had largely ceased to exist as an effective force. The few remaining cargo ships were huddled in heavily defended ports, afraid to venture into waters dominated by American naval aviation. Looking back on 3.5 years of combat flying, I'm struck by how much the war changed and how much it stayed the same. The pilots got better, the aircraft improved, the tactics evolved. But the fundamental challenge remained constant: getting close enough to the enemy to deliver effective attacks while surviving the experience yourself. What changed everything was having weapons we could trust. The Mark13 torpedo transformed American naval aviation from a courageous but ineffective force into the most potent anti-shipping weapon in history. The same pilots who had pressed home hopeless attacks with defective torpedoes in 1942 became the instrument of Japanese defeat when given proper tools in 1944. The human cost of the torpedo program's early failures will never be fully calculated. How many good men died carrying weapons that wouldn't work? How many ships escaped destruction because our torpedoes failed at critical moments? How much longer did the war last because American air power couldn't effectively attack Japanese shipping for the first 2 years of fighting? But I prefer to remember what we accomplished once we got it right. The improved Mark13 torpedo didn't just sink ships, it broke the back of Japanese logistics and helped bring the war to a faster conclusion. Every successful torpedo attack meant fewer American soldiers would have to storm defended beaches. Every sunk cargo ship meant less ammunition for Japanese defenders to fire at our advancing troops. Today, when people study the Pacific War, They focus on the great carrier battles, Midway, the Philippine Sea, late Gulf. Those were certainly decisive engagements that shaped the course of the conflict. But historians often overlook the unglamorous work of anti-shipping operations, the daily grind of hunting down enemy cargo vessels and cutting Japanese supply lines. The Mark-13 torpedo was the weapon that made that victory possible. Once American engineers finally solved its technical problems, it became one of the most effective anti-ship weapons of World War II. Japanese shipping losses to American torpedo attacks increased by over 400% once the reliable Mark-13s reached operational squadrons. The torpedo's success also demonstrated something important about American industrial capability. When the Mark-13 failed, American engineers didn't give up or switch to different weapons. They systematically identified every problem, developed solutions, tested the fixes, and kept improving until they had a weapon that worked reliably under combat conditions. That same methodical approach to problem-solving would characterize American military technology development for decades to come. For the pilots who flew torpedo bombers in the Pacific, the Mark-13 represented something even more important: proof that American industry cared about the men who used its products. For too long, we'd felt abandoned by the engineers and bureaucrats who designed our weapons without understanding the conditions under which we'd have to use them. The Mark-13's transformation from failure to success showed that our concerns were finally being heard and addressed. My final thoughts about the Mark-13 torpedo come from a mission I flew in January 1945, during the American landings on Luzon. We were tasked with attacking a Japanese convoy attempting to evacuate high-ranking officers and valuable equipment from Manila before American forces could capture the city. It was a small convoy, just 3 ships with a single destroyer escort, but intelligence indicated that one of the cargo vessels was carrying gold reserves from the Philippine National Bank that the Japanese had looted during their occupation. More importantly, several high-ranking Japanese generals were reportedly aboard, fleeing to Japan with critical intelligence about American invasion plans. We found the convoy just after dawn, hugging the coast of Luzon and making good speed toward the north. The destroyer spotted us first and began laying a smokescreen, but it was too little, too late. 6 TBF Avengers carrying Mark-13 torpedoes were more than enough to handle 3 cargo ships and a single escort. I led the attack personally, targeting the largest of the 3 merchants. As my torpedo dropped away and began its run toward the target, I felt the same confidence that had characterized every torpedo attack since October 1944. The Mark-13 would work. It always worked now. The torpedo struck the cargo ship squarely amidships, and the explosion was everything we'd come to expect from a properly functioning weapon. The ship's back broke instantly, her stern lifting clear of the water as the 600-pound warhead opened her hull like a can opener. She was gone in less than 4 minutes, taking with her whatever secrets and treasures she'd been carrying toward Japan. My wingman scored hits on the other 2 merchants, sending both to the bottom in short order. The destroyer tried to mount a rescue operation, but fighter planes from our escort drove her off with repeated strafing runs. Within 20 minutes of the first torpedo drop, 3 more Japanese ships had joined the thousands of others littering the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. As we formed up for the flight home, I realized that this kind of systematic destruction of enemy shipping had become routine for American naval aviation. What had once been desperate, usually futile attacks against impossible odds was now methodical, professional execution of enemy vessels trying to escape American air superiority. The Mark-13 torpedo had made the transformation possible. It had turned us from brave but ineffective attackers into precision instruments of naval warfare. And in doing so, it had helped win the war in the Pacific. After years of failures, one perfect weapon changed everything. The Mark-13 torpedo, once the symbol of American industrial incompetence and military frustration, became the instrument that severed Japanese supply lines and hastened the end of World War II. I flew 89 combat missions in the Pacific theater between Pearl Harbor and VJ Day. I dropped 23 torpedoes in combat, 12 of the old, unreliable Mark-13s that failed more often than they worked, and 11 of the improved versions that rarely missed their targets. The difference between those 2 weapons was the difference between defeat and victory, between futile sacrifice and meaningful accomplishment. The numbers tell the story. American torpedo bombers sank approximately 180,000 tons of Japanese shipping in 1942 and 1943 combined, a pathetic performance for hundreds of torpedo attacks. In 1944 and 1945, using the improved Mark 13, we sank over 800,000 tons of enemy vessels. Same pilots, same tactics, same courage, but finally, reliable weapons. For the young men who climbed into TBF Avengers and TBD Devastators during those dark early years of the war, the Mark 13's eventual success was vindication of their sacrifice. They had pressed home attacks knowing their weapons would probably fail, because it was their duty as American fighting men. When the torpedo finally worked as designed, their courage was rewarded with victory. The Mark 13 torpedo taught us that in modern warfare, brave men with defective weapons will always lose to competent enemies with reliable tools. But it also proved that American industrial and engineering capability, once properly focused and directed, could solve any technical problem and produce weapons superior to anything our enemies possessed. Most importantly, the Mark 13's transformation from failure to success demonstrated the resilience of American military institutions. When confronted with a weapon that didn't work, we didn't give up or look for excuses. We fixed the problems, improved the design, and kept fighting until we had tools worthy of American fighting men. That lesson would serve us well in the decades of global conflict that followed World War II. Every time American forces faced technical challenges or equipment failures, the memory of the Mark 13 torpedo reminded us that persistence, systematic analysis, and commitment to excellence could overcome any obstacle. The Mark 13 torpedo didn't just sink Japanese ships. It proved that Americans, when properly equipped and supported, were the finest fighting force in the world. And that proof, written in the burning wrecks of enemy vessels scattered across the Pacific Ocean, was worth every struggle, every failure, and every life lost in learning to make it work. After years of failures, one perfect weapon changed everything. The Mark 13 torpedo turned the tide of the Pacific War, and I was privileged to be there when it happened.